Let's begin. Welcome to the International Federation on Aging's Vision Health panel, Biosimilars in Ophthalmology. Is there a big change on the horizon? My name is Andra Stenko, Project Officer with the IFA, and I will briefly review housekeeping. This webinar will begin with panel presentations, followed by a moderated question and answer session. Please use the chat function along the bottom of your screen to indicate you have a question, comment, or to share resources, and we will call upon you to pose your question during the moderated discussion. The the webinar is recorded and will be made available on the program website icu.care, along with other relevant resources. And now it is my pleasure to pass the floor to Dr. Jane Barrett, Secretary General of the IFA.
Thank you very much, Andra, and welcome to everybody this morning and this afternoon. Before we really open up this webinar, I really just wanted to pause a moment because many of us have been doing Zoom meetings from back to back from morning till night, and I know that it becomes very tiresome but necessary. And it's necessary because, we are still in the midst of, a pandemic, a global pandemic that many of us didn't ever believe that we would be in, come August. To date, over 20 million people have been diagnosed with the coronavirus. And, the great tragedy of this is that over 741,000 people in the world today have lost their lives to COVID and the complications. So it's important to, while we move into this important webinar, to really acknowledge some of the reasons as to why we're talking today via Zoom. So let us remember those who have lost their lives, but also the families that are constantly, dealing with their loss. ICU Vision Health Panel, was supposed to be happening not in August, but earlier in the year. But in the midst of the pandemic, we really felt that there was a lot of noise and rightly so, around COVID, hence moving it to today. The area of our focus is biosimilars in ophthalmology. Is there a big change on the horizon? And indeed there is. But the webinar today, really is part of our education, part of our understanding of what biologics and biosimilars are, understanding and hearing from some experts about biosimilars policies in Canada, and really having a robust discussion about what it really means for patients. The IFA is very pleased to be able to host this webinar today with these expert speakers, with support from an unrestricted educational grant from Bayer Inc. In Canada, about 2 million people are at risk for irreversible vision loss due to retinal diseases like AMD, diabetic retinopathy, and diabetic macular edema. Biologic medicines are some of the most advanced and, as we will hear from Doug, some of the most expensive treatments available to treat such conditions. But biosimilars have been around in Canada for quite some time. They've been used as a cost-saving alternative treatment to biologics in rheumatology and other treatment areas. And recently, biosimilar policies across Canada suggest the entry of biosimilars into the field of ophthalmology. While biosimilars may be an emerging treatment option in ophthalmology, stakeholders such as IFA, FBC, CCB, have raised some concerns about clinical guidelines and, most importantly, patient education. The time is now to raise awareness about biosimilars. Awareness of this emerging issue is the first step to overcoming treatment concerns and uncertainties. And today we have three brilliant speakers. And in order, I would just like to introduce them. Dr. Dawn Richards, Vice President of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance. Mr. Doug Earle, President and CEO of Fighting Blindness Canada. And our great colleague and friend, Louise Gillis, President of the Canadian Council of the Blind. Each of the speakers are going to make some opening remarks and share with you their experiences and expertise, and then we're going to have a discussant and open the floor up for questions. So enjoy this experience, learn a lot, and be part of this robust discussion. So Dr. Dawn Richards, Vice President of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, the floor is yours, Dawn.
Thanks very much. I wanted to thank the IFA for having me here today to speak a little bit about some of the experiences that we've had in rheumatology in Canada since the introduction of biosimilars. I know that my bio has been provided, but just briefly, I live with a chronic incurable disease called rheumatoid arthritis. It affects about 1% of the population. It generally means that most people will be on a variety of medications over their lifetime. Biologics and biosimilars make up a big part of the toolkit for people who live with rheumatoid arthritis or other types of inflammatory arthritis. We currently don't know, why certain people's arthritis responds well to medications. We have no ways of predicting that, and we have no way of predicting when their disease will stop responding to specific medications. We also know that in Canada, at least, the public drug spend for medicines for inflammatory arthritis tends to be one of the number one, number two spends. So we are acutely aware that our medications cost our system quite a bit. They also enable us, though, to live our lives. So they do enable us to work, to pay taxes that go back into the system, etc. So I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about my organization. I'm a volunteer for my organization, the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, also known as CAPA. I also have to put out there that we are primarily funded by unrestricted grants from pharma, but we also do have some funding from researchers who we work with. We are a grassroots organization that has no bricks and mortar building. We have no paid employees. We have a couple of people that work for us on an hourly basis. So we're generally volunteers across Canada who live with some type of arthritis and who can really bring to the forefront to policymakers and other individuals who we work with what it's like to live with arthritis and quite frankly, our unmet needs within our current systems. So there's lots of great organizations out there, health charities like the Arthritis Society, etc. And they do a great job of putting out general information around arthritis. And there's over 100 types of arthritis too. It's not just rheumatoid arthritis or others. And we really see our role as one of, as people living with arthritis and knowing maybe all too well of what it's like to need to advocate for ourselves and our treatments and for our unmet needs to be met. We really view our role as, sharing that type of information with policymakers, with researchers, with clinicians, quite honestly, who don't always know what it's like to live with our diseases. So we put out information that we feel some of the bigger organizations maybe have overlooked or don't know because they don't live with our disease about. So based on our lived experiences, we create different types of resources and we advocate potentially in different ways than other groups would. So we're really all about patients learning about what they live with, advocating for themselves in the system at their appointments. And that doesn't mean showing up at rallies all the time or picketing. That just means speaking up for yourself sometimes. That's the most kind of basic form of advocacy. So biosimilars have been kind of on the scene in Canada, at least in rheumatology, really since about 2014 or so. At the time, they were called subsequent entry biologics in Canada, or SEBs. Now we refer to them as biosimilars, like most of the world does. In 2014, we were all kind of watching with bated breath in rheumatology, as there was a study in Norway called the Norse study. And that was the government in Norway had tendered biosimilars to be used for patients in rheumatology and in GI indications. And they were doing a study of 500 people who were switched from their biologic medication to a biosimilar. And they followed them for a brief period of time. So people were watching with bated breath. All the policymakers were watching that. Rheumatologists and GI specialists were watching that. But that was a really small study, and we hadn't seen a lot of studies of larger populations. And so we as an organization were cautious in 2014 when biosimilars were coming onto the scene. Quite frankly, it's our preference as patients to be able to make treatment decisions in an informed and educated way with our clinicians, with our healthcare providers. I'd rather not have the government tell me what kinds of medications I have to be on. And so that was kind of our starting stance, was we really wanted to, really preserve that physician or healthcare provider patient conversation with what is best for patients, and to help just continue that best approach to informed conversations about medications and about other treatments, quite frankly. So we started kind of our advocating around biosimilars back in 2014. We put out position papers around different things, including biosimilars. And we recognize they play an important role. They're part of the toolkit for people in rheumatology. But we asked the government to, and policymakers to, consider investing in research in Canada, to, if at all possible, leave those decisions for changing medications up to healthcare providers and patients. And for lack of better words, I'll say allow biosimilars to enter the market in an organic way. So people will naturally, in rheumatology, come to places in their disease where they'll need to change medications. And that's kind of where our stance at the time was. So that was, close to 6 years ago or so. And we were really aligned at the time, and still are, with the Canadian Rheumatology Association. So that's the association for our rheumatologists in Canada. And we've continued to be really aligned with that organization over the years. But as more evidence has come to bear in Canadian patients and otherwise, our position and our position papers have changed. So you kind of expect that. We see that with COVID-19 and the whole mask debate, et cetera. As the evidence changes, policy changes, and people's thoughts around, in this case, biosimilars change. So we've always advocated for there, at the very least, to be exemptions when policy is created, if policy is going to indicate that people have to be moved from their biologic medications onto biosimilars. And we've honestly been pleased as we've seen policy roll out across the different provinces in Canada, because it's up to the provinces and territories to create these policies, that we've seen there be a space for exemptions or special needs for specific individuals. And we've also advocated for and seen that roll out with respect to often children who live with these conditions, as well as pregnant women. So you probably know clinical trials aren't often conducted in pregnant women. So we've continued to push the government around those exemptions as policies have rolled out across the different provinces. We've also asked for, and not always seen, but we've made an ask for funding to be put back into research so that we can actually see how these policy changes have impacted patients. there's lots of conversation that, I mean, Health Canada, our regulator, has deemed these products safe and efficacious. And so we take that information from them, and we know that policymakers take that information with them. But we would really like to see, as patients, good, robust studies of how policy changes have impacted patients. And we've also asked government to consider putting some of those savings from these biosimilar policies back into other services for people in our communities. So currently things such as physiotherapy and occupational therapy are not covered. That's usually something people have to pay out of pocket for. And so those are things we've continued to ask for. It doesn't usually happen, just so people know, when money is saved, for example, in the drug space, it kind of just goes back into a pool of money for the healthcare system. But we've made a conscious ask to see if government would be willing to fund research and to fund some of these other services that would be really helpful for patients. So I guess I'll kind of wrap up here. My main points are that our position has changed a bit over time as we've seen continued evidence build on the safety and efficacy of biosimilars. We've maintained that at the very least, we'd like to see special exemptions when clinicians and patients feel that's really required, whether they're children, pregnant women, people who've had real issues with their arthritis over the years. We've continued to ask for funding to be put into research about the impact of these policies. And we just really feel it's important for policymakers to know, in addition to the evidence that's available to them on biosimilars, what it's like to live with our diseases, and the uncertainty that comes from that, how much we do have to advocate within our systems. And it's our role really to help amplify the voices of patients like myself and others who live with these chronic diseases that have unmet needs. And we also are a really collaborative group. So we've worked quite a bit with the rheumatology associations across the country, with other patient organizations, with the health charities as well. In some cases, as I mentioned, like with the Rheumatology Association, we've been fairly aligned in our asks. And in other cases, we haven't been as aligned with some organizations. And again, that's with respect to our comfort level with the evidence and in watching it come to bear. So I think I'll wrap up there. That's a bit of an overview for you of our experience over the past 5 to 6 years or so with respect to biosimilars in Canada. And I'm happy to pass the floor off next, I think, to Doug. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Dawn. Very much appreciate that. And I thank the International Federation of Aging for inviting me to join this panel. And of course, I've worked with Dawn and I've worked with Louise over the years. So this has been, it's a bit of a high school reunion, shall we say, as I've worked in the arthritis space when biologics were first coming into Canada. So to see the progress to date with now biosimilars, it's quite interesting. Thank you, Dawn. What I would like to do is just introduce a little bit about Fighting Blindness Canada, talk a little bit about the ophthalmology space and the anti-VEGF research, and talk a little bit about this new frontier that we're looking or know that is coming, and would like to talk about the importance of you as a patient having an informed discussion with your physician and making a decision about the treatment that you receive. And unfortunately, today in some of our provinces, that option's not being given to you, and may not when we move into ophthalmology with a biosimilar, that you have that choice. So first off, a little bit about Fighting Blindness Canada. We were formed in 1974 by families who had loved ones that were living with blinding eye disease, and there was at that time We didn't understand the biology, actually how these diseases happened. We didn't understand the genetic driver of some of these diseases. And basically, especially in the inherited retinal space, those diseases, people were diagnosed and basically told that there's no options, prepare to become blind. Well, that wasn't good enough for families living with loved ones with these conditions, and that's why Fighting Blindness Canada was formed. It was to research, to raise money, to fund research, to accelerate discoveries, and to be able to help people give treatment options that could restore their sight or avoid blindness in the first place. Well, I'm pleased to say that after $40 million being invested in research in Canada and in other parts of the world by Fighting Blindness Canada and a global research effort, that has changed. And right now, here in Canada, Health Canada is reviewing the first treatment that restores sight for an inherited retinal disease. And we're very hopeful in the year 2020, of course, being such a symbolic year, being that perfect vision is 2020, that we are hoping that Health Canada will approve and that the provincial governments will publicly fund this first treatment, offering hope to Canadians with inherited retinal diseases. For age-related macular degeneration, the AMD, and the diabetes-related vision complications, of course, the first restoring sight medication was in 2006 approved for use in Canada, and that's our anti-VEGF treatments that we're talking about today. And at that time, the first draft recommendation around provincial funding of that medication was no. So it was actually the community coming together to mobilize that changed that recommendation and changed the direction in the country that today over 100,000 Canadians who have the end stage of AMD and diabetic retinopathy, where there is bleeding in their eye, are able to take advantage of decades of research. And that really is critical for us when talking about biosimilars, because it is research and knowledge that is critical. And Fighting Blindness Canada is the largest funder of vision research in the country. We're trying to accelerate these, bringing new treatments to options and to the country. Where we also have a mandate around accessibility to these treatments, because it's one thing to have the discoveries, have these treatments taking place around the world, but Canadians need access to it, and that's our dual mandate. So a part of that is giving, helping you make informed decisions about your care, and participate in clinical trials. At the earliest stages of these treatments being tested in research, and then when they have gone through that rigor, that they're safe, that they work, that we understand the adverse effects, what happens if there's a complication, and that they go through the regulatory process to become treatments in the country through Health Canada. So of course, that's the role of Fighting Blindness Canada, and we're very interested in this space because one of the key policy decisions that Dawn mentioned is around funding of innovative new treatments. That's critical. We have to support a research environment in order that people can have options. And today, there's no reason why the number of people living with blindness has tripled in the last decade, from 500,000 Canadians to 1.5 million in 2017, according to Stats Canada, and that over 5.5 million Canadians living with an eye condition, an eye disease that puts them at significant risk of losing their sight, actually has to progress to them losing their sight. Because research has delivered treatments like anti-VEGFs that can stabilize your sight if you are diagnosed early enough. So that's critical, that we're able to, and because you have access to these treatments, we're able to make those statements that 3 out of 4 people, if diagnosed early enough, can receive a treatment because of research delivered that enables you to stabilize your sight. Now, research is trying to figure out the 1 in 4 that the treatments don't work, and also how we can treat later stages of the disease to either halt the loss of sight or, in the case, restore vision. That's an important role for research. Another role for research is also to be able to inform us as to what real-world data will tell us, and that's going to be very important in the biosimilar conversation. So let's talk about anti-VEGF and the protein itself. The concept was shown in some of the early discovery research back in the 70s, as early as 70s. So that this is not a new topic. We've been exploring, trying to understand the biology leading to these anti-VEGF treatments, and why eye disease has progressed for AMD and diabetes-related complications since the 70s. The seminal papers really came out in 1994. There were 2 papers in Science that talked about the biological processes that were occurring for some people, not all, but for some, around the target that anti-VEGF treatments are working to stop. And it was in those seminal papers that the first anti-VEGF treatments were identified as being effective, and that was based on, in 1989, the understanding of the biology. So today, this around the world, anti-VEGF treatments represent well over $8 billion of a market, which is driving this interest in biosimilars. And in Canada, of course, with 100,000 people being treated, it's a significant part of our health system to prevent and stabilize sight. So a part of this discussion, of course, is being very clear and understanding that biosimilars are not biosame. It's not like generics. So in the generic space, after a patent is concluded, generics do have access to the chemical formulation that is used in order to develop your treatment. In biosimilars, that's not the case around the world, in every case. There's a bit of reverse engineering and trying to understand what it is, and it uses a living cell in order to produce the biosimilar. So there is requirements around strict monitoring and development of these medications, and they're not the same. They're very similar, but they're not the same. And for people, that may have an impact on their ability to adapt, their ability to handle these medications, and also not develop antibodies that reduce the effectiveness of the treatment. And that's why it's very important that a conversation take place, an informed conversation take place between how you are experiencing a treatment with your physician, so that they can work with you to understand whether or not the medication you're receiving, whether it is the original patent medication or a generic or a biosimilar, is working, and whether or not, because of your DNA and your biology, you're developing antibodies that reduce the effectiveness of a biosimilar. The second piece of it is, in the perception whether or not you're having suboptimal treatment. There's been lots of research done in order to bring anti-VEGF to market. So the seminal paper being in 1994, it's 2006 that Canada was considering this as a treatment. So 10 to 15 years, typically $1.2 billion to $2.5 billion is spent on clinical trials and developing from that discovery science moment to bringing it to an actual treatment that would be considered around the world and in Canada. That's a lot of work, and part of that money is the rigor that is in clinical testing that is required in order to ensure it's safe. Biosimilars don't go through that same process. It's estimated that between $100 and $200 million is spent to bring a biosimilar to market. And in that case, it's because they at least have one large-scale clinical trial, and that they've have one significant pharmacokinetics to understand that the structure of the treatment, that original molecule they're using to replicate, is correct and fall as close as possible to the original patented chemical structure, which is quite rigorous. So that there is that impact. There's a lot of science that they're accepting as given around whether this biosimilar will have the same reaction, same impact, same adverse effects that the anti-VEGF molecule will have. So for us, it's very critical that whatever Health Canada does, whatever happens around the world, that we take real world data to understand whether or not that biosimilar molecule is having the same efficacy, so it is having the same impact on your eye disease, and that the adverse effects are being monitored, tracked, and that we're very reactive, we're very proactive, I should say, in expediting where real world is telling us that biosimilar is not biosame in its impact on you and the conversation that you have with your physician, and that these decisions are not being just driven by financial concerns, because your care is too important to just be a financial consideration. That you have access to the anti-VEGF treatments today that are on patent, that are about to expire for in the case in the next this year actually, and in Canada next year, and over the next 2 or 3 years. So that's we're tracking at the moment 4 biosimilars that we've been monitoring their clinical trials, and seeing what progress they seem, based on these clinical trials, to be achieving the similar results as the patented medications. But it is important that just given that it's only 1 or 2 studies being done with each of these biosimilars, that we monitor the results very closely, and that when they do, if they are approved by Health Canada and accepted by our provincial drug benefit plans, that we monitor what the real world data is telling us. And that's way, when you have a conversation, not being told that you have to take these biosimilars, but that you have a conversation with your doctor, that here is a less expensive option, the patent is expired, that could be an option, and to monitor the impact of those biosimilars on you. And that's something that we believe is very important, because as we take advantage, our health system is stressed because of COVID and many other pressures. It is important to have that we're very efficient with our healthcare dollars, and biosimilars are very attractive to provincial governments because of this cost savings. But it is important that we ensure that your care, that you ask the right questions, that you monitor the responses, to be able to ensure that you're getting optimal treatment, and that you are able to stabilize your sight, so that you don't have to, that you avoid blindness, as that at the end of the day is what is critical and what fighting blindness is all about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Louise.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you to International Federation on Aging on having us here for this important discussion today. So I'll just begin a little bit with a slight history on CCB. Canadian Council of the Blind has been around for 76 years now, since the following of World War II. And the main objective was to improve the quality of life for persons who have vision loss at that time. And then subsequent to that, part of the mandate is to improve the quality of life, but by preventing further damage and blindness. So it's working to improve healthcare to get to that point of preventing blindness. So we've been doing a fair bit of that in the more recent years. And the national scope of the work of Canadian Council of the Blind is to increase public awareness of the challenges and the barriers faced by people with vision loss as an ongoing effort. We continuously are trying to get the education out to people, such as you who are listening with us today. We at the Council provide information to our members, excuse me, as well as to the blind community through postings on our website, our Visions newsletter, social media, and our GTT program. CCB feels it is important for our membership as well as the general community to be aware of new treatments and technology and keeping people up to date on what's happening in the world at this time. It's been, excuse me, it's been found through surveys that many patients simply misinterpret or don't really understand their disease as a symptom of what's happening in their eyesight, because quite often as people age, they're assumed that they're supposed to go blind. That's one of the big myths, and that's not really true. Yes, with aging, you do lose some vision, but you don't necessarily have to lose all of it because there are treatments that can prevent that. And in order to prevent that, you need to have continuous follow-up with your ophthalmologist and optometrist just to ensure that your eye care is going as it should be, and an early diagnosis of anything that's amiss, such as macular degeneration of whatever type it may be, and other disease like diabetes and retinal vein occlusion. Our organization is, because of we're saying off the blind, means that all our board members and quite a majority of the staff all are living with blindness of one sort or another. And that's why we say off the blind, because we are governed and making the decisions for the people who have blindness issues. And healthcare is one of them. I myself have had vision loss now, legally blind for 23 years. And I was an active nurse before that, but not too many people like to see a blind nurse coming to work on them. So that had to change. So this is what I do now. So when somebody is faced with a decline in sight loss, it's important to know that eye care is rapidly changing. And just because one is getting older, you're not going to necessarily have to go blind. And one method has been used in Ottawa is the mobile eye clinic. So you can get out to get your eyes checked. The mobile clinic we have, which is kind of on hold right now due to COVID, but it goes into some of the long-term care facilities to check people who are there and want to see. Some of them have not had eye exams for quite a number of years and have been discovered to have AMD, cataracts, or other eye conditions, and they get the treatment following our exam. We also do that for school-age children and hopefully that'll all come up again once we get through this pandemic. As new treatments become available, CCB works with other organizations to provide submissions to CADTH which is the agency that looks after and making sure that the drugs are approved by Health Canada and then to the provinces following that. And by working with the organizations, we are better able to be abreast of the constant changes in healthcare. When new treatments are approved for use in Canada, this information is then posted to the public. And it was in 2010 that after much of our work ensuring that all provinces in Canada had access to treatment for AMD, and it's through our work and speaking with the ministers and doing quite a lot of advocacy to make that happen. So we've been at this work for a number of years. CCB has had many articles in the press on various occasions, and this mostly happens during White Cane Week, which is usually in February, the first full week. And it's a time to inform the public about eye disease, what's available in the programs that are there, and activities for people who have already lost some vision. Persons living with sight loss face many challenges on a day-to-day basis. But now, during this, I see a cat going by there, I think. During these changing times of the pandemic, it's very hard for many people with vision loss to be able to be out and to be mobile. So just think yourself, if you go to a grocery store or doctor's or pharmacy or something like that to pick up your prescriptions, if you would be able to close your eyes or have very little sight to find 6 feet and be able to keep that distance. So it's very difficult for all. So due to that, many people who have been getting treatment for their macular degeneration have fears of not being able to stay that distance away and are not getting the treatment, or they're just don't go to the hospital or to the clinic to get their treatment. So that is a big problem. And a number of people that I do know and I've heard from have moved from one care home to another with the hope of getting closer to treatment, but have missed several and now have lost quite a bit of sight. So those are another one of the challenges that we have. So in talking about biosimilars, Health Canada has approved biosimilars, or is in the work of approving those for many diseases such as arthritis and whatnot, but also people who are on medication for arthritis can be affected with eye conditions as well. So one disease kind of affects the other. So it's very important to make sure that all people out there, all the patients in our membership, are aware that eye care is very, very important. As Health Canada, Doug has mentioned about biosimilars quite a bit, so I'm not going to go into a lot on that. But biologics are very specific and highly effective medicines. And biosimilars are brand name products, as Doug has mentioned. CCB believes that eye treatments that are approved by Health Canada are to be used in eye diseases with the best result and in full discussion with the patient. Cost saving for the government should not be the only reason to use a cheaper drug. If a patient is newly diagnosed with AMD, for instance, then the new biosimilar that will be coming on market may be available as, or the new biologics that are also coming on market. So that full discussion with the patient, the doctor, and the caregiver is very, very important, so that you really know what what's in the future for you. Because a lot of times many patients feel that, well, the doctor knows best, and whatever the doctor says, that's what I'll go with. But that's not always the case in some areas, because maybe there are certain privileges for doctors that using one drug over another that may render you not getting what you want. So it's the development and implementation of biosimilars have significant implications across sectors and disciplines. Evidence-based information and continuing education must be a high priority. Increasingly, there are scenarios where patients may or may not have the information to access treatment options. So it's important to be able to get the treatment options. And a lot of people have to travel to clinics, and travel is not a good option either for many of our patients at this time, because it's going on the bus or taxi service is, we don't know because we can't see if those facilities are clean or people are wearing the protective equipment so that we don't contract COVID. So that in this particular time is a big challenge for persons with sight loss. Educational resources addressing concerns about biosimilars are provided by a variety of sources, including government, insurance providers, professional organizations, and patient associations. So this information is available on websites for many. Just being careful that you read something that is really founded by Health Canada and the proper ones, because sometimes you can get information that's not as reliable as others. So that is also a challenge, and especially for ones who are not able to really be able to read some of the information and the leaflets and pamphlets that are out there. So contacting any of our organizations, such as Fighting Blindness Canada or the Canadian Council of the Blind, we can help send you in the right direction of where to find the best information. And with in Canada, infusions for the originator biologics take place in one center, and sometimes for biosimilars take place in a different center. And that can be very confusing for people who are already taking the drugs that are already available and then end up being switched to a biosimilar. So those are issues that we will be facing when this comes forward for eye care. Patients have already raised several of these issues in the case with switching. So it's something that really, really needs to be getting the education out in whatever mode we can through our websites and webinars and these types of things for people who can attend. So standardizing and consistent evidence-based education messaging is essential both for patients and clinicians. Stakeholders agree that professional associations are essential in educating clinicians and that are bias-free, and organizations would effectively reach the patient. Challenge to the current COVID has been with patients receiving their anti-VEGF treatment, as I mentioned earlier, and it's very difficult for many to really understand the importance of why they need to continue taking their treatments on a regular basis, because once you start losing some vision, it's not so easy to get it back, and in some cases may never get it back. And so in conclusion, patients must be aware of the availability of safe and effective treatments. They must be able to make informed choices regarding their health alongside their healthcare provider, and they must be able to inform ongoing monitoring of treatment outcomes. Without informed voices continuing in a sustained way, the advancement in biosimilar initiatives will be driven purely by economics rather than a collective patient-centered approach. CCB works closely with often for the blind organizations such as Fighting Blindness Canada, CNIB, Best Medicines Coalitions, International Federation on Aging, and biosimilar working groups for a common goal of getting the best treatment possible in the prevention of blindness. Thank you for your time.
Look, thank you very much, Louise, and my apologies. You could probably see that I was on and off, but I was here and listening. But we just had the fireman here, at the same time. So my apologies, but I'm assured that there is no fire in the building. So we need to now go back and have the conversation. I want to just start off with Dawn. And the reason that you're with us today is because you've actually had that run up to, how to be an advocate, CAPA, and also what we need to be doing. You talked about a dynamic process that you and the organisation that you represent have undertaken. And so could you speak a little bit more about, if you are starting now, knowing what you know, what would your first steps be in advocating for patients?
Yep, thanks, Jane. Good question. I mean, I'm sitting here listening, and I think there's so many common threads across what Doug, Louise, and myself said, which I'm always pleased to see. So everyone is focusing on evidence. That's important, right? Like, that's really important. And everyone is also focusing on not just the evidence from clinical trials, but when these medicines are used in Canadians, the populations for clinical trials are very specific. But when these go into people living their lives, they don't have those specific criteria around them. So we need to make sure that what we see in the clinical trials continues to be in the case in the real world. And, I don't have reason to believe it's not going to be, but this is just something that we've continued to caution government about. So I think, to go back to your question though, Jane, a couple of things is, one, to make sure that you work with the scientific and medical community so that you have good, robust messaging for people around what biosimilars are, and you can be honest about why there's such a push for them. Our system is currently unsustainable. With prices continuing to rise, with healthcare costs continuing to rise. So let's not dodge the elephant in the room. Cost is a big deal, but our regulator is telling us that these are safe and effective. So we should not be afraid of them. But this is, again, something that I heard throughout all three of these, is having an informed conversation with people. Part of what I'll call the issue with the Canadian system is we're federally funded, but we've really got multiple governments that we have to talk to about the same issue. So again, it's kind of aligning your resources across the country, figuring out, who you can work with, what the messaging is and what the ask is of policymakers, and sticking to that, right? So ultimately, they're going to make decisions based on evidence, maybe based on funding, but knowing what your ask is and what you really want it to be is also super important for them. So again, like I mentioned, in our case, ultimately we would love for this to not be dollar driven, but let's get real about things. That's going to be part of the equation. So in the world where that's going to be part of the equation, we've asked for exemptions, and we've seen that roll out across the country. And so as much as possible, we'd like to preserve the conversation between doctors and physicians, especially in some of those cases of, children needing these medications, pregnant women, and people who are really struggling to stabilize their disease. So for us, that was like a really important ask. So, it's almost like prioritizing what your asks need to be too. And you have to look realistic when you are advocating, right? Again, I'll go back to, I wish it didn't all come down to money, but that's not the world we live in, especially when we're living in a pandemic. And so I think being thoughtful about that is really important.
Look, thanks for that, Dawn. I think being thoughtful and understanding various positions is critical. Where the IFA comes from is that, we see the whole area of vision and vision complications in the context of function. How is a person going to be able to function, which means what is the most safe and effective treatment and then, with parenthesis around safety. One of the areas that really concerns IFA, and I believe should always concern Canadians, and I pitch the question to you, Doug, it's about different provinces have different things going on. They have different policies. And as you can hear, being an Australian, this just mystifies me. How I can live in Ontario and have access to A, but if I lived in Prince Edward Island or somewhere else, I might be getting A and B, or I might get -A. Is this something that, patient and advocacy organisations should be conscious of when we're talking with, decision makers as well as policy people? Doug, you've got great experience across the board. How do we tackle this?
It is absolutely a challenge. Absolutely. And a part of it is, organizations like ours, like Louise and myself, we really have to work with people to help them understand what questions to ask and how we can help them have informed consent. Because there are provincial governments that are mandating that when a biosimilar comes onto the market, that the switch happens away from the patented medicine into a biosimilar treatment. So and the struggle, of course, is whether or not that patient knows that switch has happened. And in some provinces, that the informed consent that occurs is not very transparent. And that's why patients need, you have to, in our system, the Canadian system, with each of the different, 13 different governments mandating the local delivery of healthcare between the provincial and territorial governments, you need to be informed. You need to take charge of your care and ask the right questions. And so as an organization, it's really 14 conversations. There's the federal conversation, and then there is the 13 provincial ones, because it is unique with how care is delivered in each of those provincial and territorial mandates, and that we spend a lot of time. It's part of the reason why we created a vision health information line, is to be able to answer the questions, tailor the questions that we look to give to people, to coach them to have a conversation with their doctor that is reflective of their situation. For anti-VEGF treatments, Health Canada has approved currently 2 treatments, but there is a province in the country that it provides incentives and provides direction that they should be using a treatment, medication that is labeled by Health Canada not to be used in the eye. So that is a bit of a challenge, and both the Canadian Council of the Blind and Fighting Blindness Canada has spoken out about the use of this medication in that province several times, that impact people's care, and whether or not people know that this is the label that Health Canada has given to this medication in that province is an open question. I would say no, that most people don't realize that that's the label that Health Canada has given, and yet the provincial government is providing incentives, is encouraging doctors to use this medication to deliver anti-VEGF care. So yes, it is a huge challenge, and one that requires a lot of complexity, and does require tailoring to your circumstances.
So look, I'm going to be a little bit bold here, Doug. There's a couple of things that we've said here. And I think I'd like to actually ditch the words challenge interesting, because what you've just described is actually not acceptable, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in terms of incentivization of doctors around treatments. It's just not acceptable. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is, you know, informed consent may not be so transparent. Since when did informed consent not be transparent? And I think while we use this, you know, this grey zone, I think, you know, it's really important for organisations to come together, you know, with a voice, you know, around certain issues. And I agree with your perspective that it's very complex, and we've called on government to do something and they haven't. And, you know, what we're trying to be is proactive as we move into this environment of biosimilars. And I don't think anybody on the call here today is saying biosimilars are bad. That's not what we're saying. You know, what we're saying is that patients, you know, Louise, Dawn, myself, you, need to have information in a way that makes sense to us so that we can ask the question, you know, of physicians. I think equally, you know, physicians and their education around biosimilars could do well with being improved in some areas. So, you know, it's, I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, IFA is very keen to join with others, you know, across disciplines, including, you know, Kappa and GI, and, you know, so that there is a deeper understanding of kind of the, not only the policy implications, but the real life experiences of patients that need to be a legitimate part of the conversation. You know, because I think that sometimes the patient voice is, oh, we need the patient voice, where are they? Instead of, the patient is at the table, the person is at the table when we're talking about switching, you know, a tiered approach, mandating. And I'll ask one of you just to talk a little bit about those terms. Louise, you know, your thoughts about this conversation, and you've been at the heart of that conversation about incentivization and challenges. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, informed consent is great, but fully informed consent, and fully is the word that I've been using for quite some time, because when a patient goes to get their treatment, the doctor quite often will say, well, we have these medications that you have to take, and they're injected into your eye. Here's a paper we're asking you to sign, and it just explains that what the drug is about, but it's an injection and they all do the same work, so just sign it. So the patient goes on and signs the document, and then when they come out or the family asks, or somebody in particular, I say to them, well, what treatment are you getting for your condition? Well, I don't know. Like, they were never really told or understood what the treatment was. And that's where the fully part comes in. And also indicating that the one that Doug has mentioned has a black label on it is never really addressed from the people that I talk to, that they are aware of that. So it's trying to get that information out to the public, and how we can do that so that when a patient goes in for their treatment, that they know, or the caregiver should be there with them as well, in order to be able to really understand what's happening. Because if you go in for an injection in your eye, that's a very scary process. You know, like, who wants to get a needle in their eye? So they just say, well, do it and get it over with. And that will be all that I want to do. And if it's going to help, then that's fine. They're not given the information regarding the fact that there's not a lot of knowledge on side effects and what can happen with these ones that are not approved by Health Canada. So it leaves the patient kind of up in the air. They just want to not get blind. So if this is going to help, then let's see what happens. They don't really understand that maybe they'll have a stroke or heart condition, you know, some other problem as a side effect of this. So that's where the difficulty lies, is to get that information out.
Yeah. Doug.
I just wanted to add, you know, a part of living with blindness, especially with AMD and diabetes-related complications, they do occur at later stages in life, and it is you know, a fact that 1 in 7 at the age of 45, and it's 1 in 4 at the age of 70 are impacted by these blinding eye diseases. So it is an aging, vulnerable population that is going to see their physician for treatment primarily, and it's at the end stage of the disease. So they're 80, 90 years old in some cases. So informed consent does need to be transparent, and it does need, you know, it is. We did a survey a few years ago for people with diabetes, living with diabetes, that were getting eye injections, and we were trying to find Canadians who were in that category, that experience, to answer the quality of life survey, and we were talking about what the medical diagnosis was: diabetic macular edema. But no one said, well, I don't have that. I don't know if I have that. We had to use the question, you know, are you getting an eye injection? Are you living with diabetes and getting an eye injection, in order to identify the people that had diabetic macular edema, in order to answer this question. So I think it speaks to the lack of knowledge, the lack of awareness, and that the medical system is not informing the patient about what is happening with their care, and that's a challenge, and I know you don't want to use the word challenge, but it's a problem, and this is why calls like this are important, and it's why information needs to get out, and there's an obligation on our ministries of health, and but there's also in our system, because of its complexity, it's you have to be informed, and you have to take advantage of the information organizations like ours provide.
I think it's also, you know, we have a responsibility, but I believe we need to go beyond our own borders. You know, so I'm keen to sort of have the Rotaries of the world, and Seroptimists, and Participation, and YMCAs, and because, you know, information is only as good as when you need it. And if you don't think you need it, then you're not going to listen to it. And so it really is, how do we really infiltrate the general community, you know, because many older people may have the beginnings of AMD, age macular disease, way before they actually go to, you know, a specialist. And so I think that we've got to think differently. And you're right, challenge is what it is. And I think sometimes the way that we communicate, you know, needs to be examined.
Mm-hmm.
So we
would
do
agree.
Yeah, we do have another speaker, a person we call a discussant. And before I introduce Carol Foley, I just wanted to say that the IFA purposefully works with industry. And the reason being is that we believe that we have to have government, non-government, industry, academic, and individuals working together on a common agenda to actually change policy. And so, you know, industry brings to the table a unique intelligence. And so I'm always curious and interested to hear from industry. So Dr. Carol Foley is the National Director of Government Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement at Janssen. And Janssen reached out to the IFA a short time ago, Ursula Mann, and we had a good conversation just generally, you know, about the industry. And then she mentioned about their interest in biosimilars. So Carol, welcome to the discussion today. I think that you're going to make some remarks to to add to our discussion points?
Absolutely. I hope everyone can hear me, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the panelists for the discussion so far. It's been very interesting and informative. And I, I just wanted to introduce myself as Jane mentioned. Carol Foley. I work at Janssen Canada, and Janssen are the pharmaceutical companies of Johnson & Johnson. And we are the world's largest and most broadly based healthcare company in the world. We work in over 150 countries, and we are really focused on, the words we use are improving health for humanity around the world. And our areas of innovative research mainly right now focus on 5 main areas. So immunology is a big one, and Dr. Richards spoke to some of the treatments we offer in biologics in the space of rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, those kinds of conditions. We also have a rich history in neuroscience. Our founder, Dr. Paul Janssen, was one of the main researchers in the area of neuroscience back 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so we have a rich history there in schizophrenia and mental health. We also focus in oncology, cardiovascular and metabolic diseases, and as well infectious diseases and vaccines. And I know that's something that's top of mind for everyone right now. And as I mentioned, we have developed and been at the forefront of the development of innovative biologics for many immune diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, and others. And we continue to focus on developing new innovation in areas of high unmet need around the world. And we are actually moving into some work in diseases of the eye, and we've been developing some really early stage gene therapies for eye conditions. So in terms of biologics, we've been really focused on this policy work for many years around the world and here in Canada. And I have to say, having listened to the panel, we are very aligned with the patient position that the use of biologics or biosimilars within this space is safe. They're safe and effective. They're approved by Health Canada. So I think someone said, I forget who it was, no one needs to be afraid of them. They definitely have a place as a new treatment option and a different option for patients. But we also strongly believe that the use of biosimilars needs to be decided by the patient and the physician in that informed consent conversation. And rather than being driven by efforts that are driven solely by cost choices and that restrict treatment choice. And however, we really do understand that, there are cost pressures on our healthcare system. As Canadians and as a taxpayer, we really want our tax-paying dollars going to the places that are best providing best patient care. So we understand the place that biosimilars play in that, absolutely. We just want to make sure that those decisions are being driven by the patient and the physician. And I think a couple other points to make. Often governments will cite a higher uptake of biosimilars in places like Europe. And a couple points on that. Biosimilars have been around quite a bit longer in some countries in Europe. So they've been, had more of an opportunity for what I think someone called an organic uptake within the system. And also importantly, the approach in most European countries, beyond just a few in Eastern Europe and a couple others, but for most of them have really focused on that idea of education, educating the physicians, educating the patients, providing opportunities for a switch conversation to happen between a patient and the physician, and providing the information that both of those parties need to make that informed decision, but not imposing a government mandated move from a branded biologic to a biosimilar in a patient that's stable on their treatments. As Dr. Richards knows, many patients in areas such as rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's and colitis take many years to find the treatment that works for them, whether that's a biologic or not. And when they become stable, it's a difficult conversation to talk about moving from that treatment. So it's important that those patients are informed and the physicians are making those choices for the appropriate patients, and that exemptions be available, as Dr. Richards mentioned. The other piece I just wanted to highlight as well that was a bit different from what was talked about already is and it speaks to what Dr. Richards was speaking to, is that it really is important for governments to not make, we believe, a broad policy position on all biologics, but that they look at the evidence for individual products and individual therapeutic areas. So Dr. Richards mentioned that the data has evolved in rheumatology. That data has not evolved in an area such as Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. They're not there yet. In fact, the Canadian Association of Gastroenterology has put out a study where they looked at the data, and they didn't feel that that data had evolved enough to feel confident in those, broad policies around switching. But that doesn't mean that that won't change. And the worry is that when you move into other spaces like diseases of the eye, that data may not, and I have to admit I'm not as up to date on the data around biosimilars in this space, but it's important in any therapeutic area that decision makers and policymakers make decisions based on the data that's specific to that therapeutic area and not have a broad blanket policy around biosimilars. So those would be sort of the additional points. Again, biosimilars definitely are an option that provide cost savings to governments, and they need to be used in a way that respects that patient-physician choice. And Janssen does continue to work with governments and attempt to work with governments in order to deliver the cost savings that they are seeking when it comes to biosimilars, but still be able to continue to preserve that patient and physician choice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Foley, and thank you for being with us today. I think that's provided another insightful set of considerations as we go forward. As we're coming up to the close of this webinar in about 15 minutes, I'm just going to ask each of the speakers for their closing messages. And really it's, where do we go to next? What would be some steps that you feel as a community across sectors and disciplines that we need to take going forward, keeping in mind that there's been a lot of discussion around the landscape in Canada, the differences among provinces, and the importance of patient education. So perhaps if I start off, I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'll start off with Dawn, and then Doug, and then Louise, and then we'll wrap up. Some of the things that I've still got questions about, and Dawn, you really started off by saying that this is a dynamic landscape, that there's continuing evidence, and we need to keep up with that evidence and be advocates with and for those people with the diagnosis. And I think that's a key element. We're not doing it on behalf of, but we're working with. I think the stronger the advocate, particularly, when you're an older person, it really is important that you have someone with you going into a consultation. I think that we've also looked at, what's the compromise that we should be asking, or as a patient, what's the compromise that we're being asked to make? If my medication and my function is stable, then is a mandatory switching policy in a province going to serve me the best? And if not, what rights do I have, for example? At the bottom of the conversation for me is, what is the most safe and effective and appropriate treatment? Do I have the sufficient information that I can actually have a dialogue with my doctor about? So, Dawn, could you just kick us off with some of your closing remarks and key messages for the audience today?
Sure thing. I'll try my best here. So I think to your point about patient and caregiver education, I mean, that's something we focused on. Whatever your medication is, it's important for you to understand it. So I think bringing resources to people about biosimilars is important. And there's lots of good things out there already. So you don't necessarily have to completely recreate the wheel. I would encourage IFA, FBC, CCB I mean, you can see the government policies that have been created around rheumatology, starting around GI, some of the conversations that have happened around oncology too. So I think you can learn from those things. You can see, to Dr. Foley's point, the GI folks have gone in a different direction. They don't feel like the evidence is there. And I would encourage you to talk to organizations about their experiences. I also think, working with others in this area, whether it's the healthcare providers, the physician groups, the more that you can rally around it and have the same messaging, I think that's really important for your communities as well as for government and policymakers. So they're not being faced by, 5 different messages from the same community. So I think those are the things that I can leave you with to be succinct, is learn from what's already out there, whether it's education, what policies have been created, and try as much as you can to work collaboratively and align your messaging.
Look, thanks, Dawn. And I must say that we've had several conversations, and what I've really always taken away from you is that, it's the focus on the person, the patient, and also the no nonsense, but very practical, actions that you and CAPA are taking going forward. And also the collaboration, the opportunity to share information and to build stronger over time. So I really value your participation today, but just the ongoing conversation. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Doug, what are your closing messages?
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity, especially since the biosimilars have not been yet approved by Health Canada, to really take a lead on this. And of course, we're very interested in working with yourselves, with the Canadian Council of the Blind and others, around the development of a conversation guide that could help patients and physicians have a conversation around the switch period, if that's appropriate, and that it's not only the questions to ask, what are appropriate, giving some guidance around some appropriate answers, but also, as you've suggested, options around what a patient can do if they're not happy with the answers they're getting. As there's lots of evidence around how anti-VEGFs should be working as the patented medicine, branded medicine, but it is this new territory around these biosimilars that don't have the same rigor that the clinical trials require for those original molecules. And then the second part, I think it's incumbent upon us as organizations to require, to work with, as Dawn suggested, the Canadian Ophthalmological Society, the Canadian Retina Society, the medical professionals, and the ministries, to develop a tracking system and a transparent release of the information around the real world of adverse effects and for people, so that people are aware of, that we're aware of as organizations giving voice to people living with these conditions, that of the cases, and that we can update and inform people as to the questions and the opportunities that biosimilars. It's absolutely critical. If we're going to have access to these innovative treatments that are not available to people today, that can restore sight, then we need to also deal with when patents are done, and making the system viable. And I would encourage Canadians that have questions to help us answer those questions that this webinar and others are going to cause, to call the Vision Health Information Line of Fighting Blindness Canada at 1-888-626-2995. And I did put the information in the chat. Hopefully your screen readers didn't go wild with reading the chat at the same time as we're talking. But it is we invite Canadians to visit our fightingblindness.ca website, to ask your questions, help us develop a guide that really does reflect what you are looking to have answered, and to have those conversations. I think that's our role, and to work with each of you to develop something that is very user friendly.
And look, thanks, Doug. I think what you've really brought to us is, you know, the lens on biosimilars in ophthalmology and your extraordinary sort of history and experience in this field and in the civil society sector as a whole. You know, we would be very interested in being participants in the development of a conversation guide. And I can tell you that Andra, you know, will gather up all of the resources from the chat box and make sure that they are pushed out, you know, across Canada, so we can be in conversation about how we can help build the capacity of your organisation and collaborate stronger, you know, as we go forward in this important conversation. So thank you. Louise, your voice is one of the most important in this conversation. What messages can we take away from you? You're on mute, Louise.
Sorry about that. One of the most important things I think that we need to take away is once we get this information that both Dawn and Doug were discussing, and you know, just making sure that we get the proper information that we can send out to people, and working with all of the organizations mentioned, that this information can go to people who really need it. And quite often somebody who is just going along in life and maybe they have arthritis or don't have it, or have diabetes or don't have it, are not really thinking of losing their eyesight. So they're not about to go and start reading a lot of information about treatments that are available. So when the time comes, they're at a loss. And it's to get in touch with the ones who need it prior to this. We do speaking arrangements in different places with seniors groups and that sort of thing, but it's still not getting it out to the right places. And that's one of the problems that I see. You know, we can put ads on TVs and articles in the newspapers and that sort of thing, but quite often I don't find that a lot of people who really are facing the possibility of having eye disease are really looking at that. Because just as one mother said about a child, we're not a glasses family, so we don't pay attention. So that's in the children's line. So it would be very much the same. And then for the seniors, well, as you grow older, you're supposed to go blind anyway. So why worry about these things? So they're not really taking all the information that is available to heart until it's almost too late, and don't have the information when they make that initial physician visit. So it's how do we get that out to everybody in a good time?
Okay.
I think that's
Thank you, Louise. And I think that you just confirmed, you know, also what the other speakers mentioned, that, you know, information going out about, you know, biosimilars, but also the importance of, you know, early screening, prevention, safe and appropriate treatment is critical. You know, this webinar about biosimilars, and the title is there a big change on the horizon? Well, yes, there is, you know, because as Dawn said, it's a dynamic place that we're in. But in terms of the horizon, we have a lot more work to do, you know, as we plan and position, you know, our conversation with patients and with other stakeholders around biosimilars. So you can count on IFA, CCB and SCB and others across the sector, across disciplines, and particularly the work in biosimilars that Dawn and her organisation has done, and others, you know, to be really continuing to put positions forward so that we can engage, you know, the clinicians as well as the policymakers and also industry in this conversation. In closing, I want to thank Bayer for their ongoing support and encouragement to place vision health in the context of older people on the agenda in Canada and around the world. So thank you. And also finally to my colleague, Andra Stanku, who works incredibly hard in putting this webinar together. So thank you, Andra. And we wish you well, keep safe and well, and those of your family. And thank you once again for your attention and all the speakers. All the best. Bye-bye.